Julie, it is I've always wanted to say this. We're live from Las Vegas here at Grocery Shop talking about all things grocery. I know we've talked a lot about kind of what's happening around food waste and the supply chain and, we're just getting it really from every angle right now. As you look at this and you start to think about, some of the misconceptions people have, we should talk today about like busting some myths from our recent report.
Yeah, that's.
Are you ready?
Great. Yes, it's so great to be in real life. It's great to see you again.
It's like unbelievable. So, I think that the grocery industry, as we look at it, there is a kind of one of the biggest myths is that there's this like clear view of food waste. I mean, as we were getting ready for this, we couldn't even find the same definition for food waste on like many different kind of groceries websites and whatnot. So first of all, how do you define it? And secondly, why do you think the retailers don't have a clear view of this?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's two pieces. So yes, one is defining the size. Specifically for grocers, it's defined very differently across loss and donations and waste. Globally, there's a lot of really high-level numbers that we all align on. 1/3 of all food produced for human consumption ends in a landfill. That was pre-COVID. Now the latest WWF study shows 40%. But when you dig into the actual cause of that, a big piece is us. We leave food on our plate. But in the retail space and supply chain, there's still 40% of that total waste number that's coming before we even purchase it as consumers. And when you look at operations, a lot of these industries, specifically retailers, still kind of running inventory on paper and pencil, or there's disparate siloed systems that are trying to understand what they have where, and more importantly, what they quantify as waste or loss.
Well, it's really interesting. I'm getting ready. I'm interviewing a favor from Unilever later today. And as I've been spending a lot more time on like the CPG side of things, right, straight from her lips, right, she's talking about the amount that's actually wasted in factories. And I have to say, as being kind of more of a retail grocery analyst, that's not an area I've really focused on. And so when you start to think about everything that we know from like the grocery side and then compounding that with everything from the CPG side, right, it's at a whole different level. And it goes back to, right, like busting these myths. It's not where I would have thought, right? I would have thought it would have been more on the grocery side and the human consumption side, not that far back in the supply chain. Where do you think people, once again, are missing some of these pockets of waste?
Yeah, I think a lot of it goes back to what you can measure and how you measure it. And so there's incredible advancements happening across automation and machine learning. But at the end of the day, you really have to have a strong, accurate, and automated data set. Now, you mentioned CPG. Now, perishables too, they only account for about 11% of retail sales, but they're 80% of the waste. But there's definite opportunity across all categories, not just from an environmental perspective, how do we waste less, but from a financial perspective. So for an industry that was already operating on razor-thin margins before the pandemic, now with the complexity of the acceleration of omni-channel and other labor-intensive, data-intensive processes, really truly driving efficiency into the supply chain around physical inventory, optimizing production and consumption is going to become a critical advantage for opening up some margin space that they'll desperately need to fund some of these new digital programs as well.
So one thing that I found in retail, right, is when the consumer, or when I was a Wall Street analyst, right, if we said something or if the consumer says it, it gets done, right? Because ultimately retailers and CPG companies, right, they want the consumer to be happy. Do you think that if the consumer understood this better, right, this myth that and kind of really debunking it, do you think that their voice would carry a weight, that this would get done faster?
Yeah, and I think we're starting to see the consumer trends accelerate, specifically in certain pockets, not just around environmental impact of food, but also around food selection, transparency, knowing what where it comes from and who makes it. And you don't have to go that far back in time, right? About 50 years ago, you not only knew where your food came from, but you probably knew the person that grew it, or it didn't come from far away. A lot of that's changed. Now we're still looking for that information online, but there will be a shift into the responsibility to tell the story, but then also give consumer access digitally to the physical products that they're consuming. And I think this is a really exciting trend for all of us because consumers are becoming increasingly powerful, especially if you look back at some of the other verticals that have already really accelerated in omni-channel, like apparel or footwear. When you look at omni-channel grocery, there is going to be this desire to have more information because you're accustomed to seeing it digitally as you start to look at products, not just on the shelf and what you can see there about that point of decision, but how that ties into how you're shopping and making brand decisions online as well.
That's really powerful. I mean, I think another myth is that, right, the grocers already have all this technology at their fingertips. I mean, I have to say, I feel some of these topics, right, we've been talking about for 2 decades in grocery. And so I went back and looked at some interviews from 5 years ago. And this exact topic, I mean, our conversation was being rehashed by others. But what is the challenge on the tech side?
Yeah, it's interesting. The technology exists. I think there's a bigger piece, though, around the actual information and capture of the data. So that goes back to just our history, our legacy is we've been printing information on products for decades. How do you actually turn that information into something that is digitally accessible, but then also can be automated and accurate? So just knowing what you have, what it is, where it comes from, and where it is in the supply chain. Once you have a complete accurate data set, you can start to add layers of technology that's far more advanced than some of what we use in our siloed, disparate, inventory optimization or current store operation systems to truly drive this visibility of a foundation where you can start to proactively action efficiency for one, but then also consumer engagement on the other side. I think the other piece is interoperability. So just as a retailer, my store here versus the one down the street, but then how that connects to the distribution, to the brands, there's going to be a lot of advancement and disruption around how we purchase and look for decisions across grocery and even just discovery of food. And so in order to do that, we really need to start to aggregate and make available data sets online in a brand new way. But it is really exciting for consumers and brands to be able to do that, not just for bottom line results on efficiency for labor and inventory optimization, which is extremely important, but as consumers as well.
It's interesting. You made me think about a project. I used to work for a retail tech company called Profit Tech, and we had a grocer come to us and they wanted to understand why their margins in chicken were so poor. And so we basically we ingested all their data and we looked for pattern irregularities. And what you found was the amount of waste that was happening, right? The butchers were in the stores and there was just no understanding, right? Even between stores. And so this ability to kind of share this intelligence, right, is incredibly critical. And it goes back to the technology, right? Which it always does. And so not only being able to share information between store managers, between stores on profitability and best processes, but then kind of as you aggregate that up and really kind of understand it. I mean, how do you think about, right, grocery is so siloed. How does technology help them break down those silos?
Yeah, the first is just, again, having more information. I think some of that goes back to the supply chain across some of the commonalities of brand, but it's also, there's a huge opportunity on common challenges they face. So one of those is around traceability and food safety. So how can some of those trends kind of drive this co-opetition of moving forward interoperability of data, digital availability of data, and then also consumer education, right? We've all gone into the store, mostly at Thanksgiving, to find all of the spinach is gone or all of the romaine is gone. Two big challenges. One, that is physical inventory, that is working capital in the garbage at a landfill. And two, we don't have a better way to, with surgical precision, to truly pull the impacted product and make sure that it doesn't have a consumer ripple effect. All of that can be solved with automated and accurate data and just knowing what comes from where and where you have it, so you can really action things quickly without disrupting the consumer impact or even store operations processes.
Well, it's really interesting, right? Our third myth is that, kind of food waste comes from spoilage. And last night I actually bumped into somebody and he was saying that they had this huge product recall and he's like, we had to pull everything because he's like, we didn't know. And I mean, he told me some of the dollars and cents and I was just, you realize, right, we're in 2021 and just the dollar impact. And I think, kind of through a lot of, what Avery's doing, right, there's huge opportunity to not only give intelligence back, but also to really impact top line and bottom line. So food waste isn't just all about spoilage. What is it really all about?
Yeah, I mean, At the end of the day, if you think about all of the other industries out there and how we've really built in really surgical precision and accuracy of how we manufacture things, how we look at quality, how we look at what the consumer needs and their kind of qualitative and quantitative feedback on what they purchase, food is still behind that in some ways. And so food retail has this amazing opportunity to really start to look at it from that perspective. I think before it was kind of a nice to have. Now, as those margins become thinner and thinner, it's going to be a critical both competitive differentiator, but also an optimizer for things that you can control around efficiency. And, we pay people money to count things incorrectly, and then we order things on the back of that incorrect data. But as consumers, we also, we kind of go in and just expect a myriad of options. We're starting to change our behavior a little bit, that physical store can still be an influencer for a point of decision, but there has to be a level of data that we're accustomed to for everything else we kind of purchase and interact with online. The industry, as they start to see that data set as a core engagement opportunity, I think we're going to see a lot of shift in how we as consumers think about the food that we eat. And then once you have that, you can start to look at things very differently. Recalls aren't about pulling products from the shelf. It's about really showing your customer this food is safe. And that's not just about impacted lots, that's about everything that we eat.
So that's an excellent point. I mean, and then I think like the myth number 4, right? Ultimately discarding food is like kind of the food waste phenom, right? But I think it's so much bigger than that, because that's actually putting all the burden in some ways on the consumer. But ultimately, I think we as consumers need to, I think we need to like raise our voices really. And I feel like I have to say, like through some of our conversations, you've changed how I think about food waste, and ultimately, right, I as a consumer, I want to shop at a grocery, I want to buy products where I know that there's a sustainability edge, because we've already done that, as you said, like in apparel and footwear, right? At least we as consumers have the data to make better decisions that are consistent with our own value set. But ultimately right now, we still don't have that transparency.
No, we still have a long way to go. And I still think there's probably a whole consumer set that may not care about that, but they still want the best quality at the lowest price. And so all of this is around kind of enabling that information, but then servicing a broad group of consumers. I think food waste, we always thought about it in terms of kind of what food is in the dumpster, but it's not just that, it's what's going to donation, how are we optimizing truly what we stock and what we order. And when you think about the magnitude globally, we make enough food to feed the entire planet 1.5 times. So there's 2 challenges. One is logistics, how do you get it to everybody that needs it? But then the other side of that is how do we just be more efficient as supply chains and retailers, and then more conscious as consumers, whether that is about kind of going towards the most efficient retailer that gives me the lowest price because they have started to really automate and look at key data sets, or whether it's about getting the information that I need to make responsible brand decisions based on my ethics, or based on what I want to choose for my family, or from a brand sustainability option.
I mean, it's funny as you're talking about this, right? You kind of envision, right, all the different pieces of the supply chain and kind of where that food waste happens. And I'm sure it's different by product category as well, which is why is it so, I mean, grocery, I've always felt like they have more data. Maybe that's the problem. More data than anyone else, because the consumer comes in 2.1 times per week. Now they're shopping offline and online. Why is it that this is such a challenge? And I actually see it globally, and I know you do too. Why is this such a challenge for grocery? That's like the $10 million question.
It's probably a $500 billion question at this point. And yeah, I think there's lots of layers to it, but it all boils down to the same thing. We think about the store and the physical retail environment across almost every retail environment, but grocery in particular and food in particular is a little behind the full omni-channel transformation, the full consumer transformation. I think we were all shocked, myself included, after a few years in food, to see during the pandemic, bare shelves, but milk being poured down the drain. It was one of those moments where you just go, something's not connecting here. And I think that there is just the $500 billion opportunity here is to not just look at it as, okay, I want to have full shelves and I have a place to donate this, or it's just kind of it's part of cost of doing business. If you can take a look at doubling your margins from an efficiency perspective around optimizing your working capital and how you're really looking at, your entire predictive ordering, price optimization, all of these key strategies, there's really a fundamental piece of data that's missing today, which is around what products are where and how you make sure they're in the right place at the right time without the excess of overstock or the risk of missing a sale. And that's still the last unlock from a product perspective in that industry.
I mean, and then like myth number 5, right, that grocers can tackle this alone. I mean, I think this is where Avery, first of all, from the moment we met, which was, a few years ago, but, just kind of hearing, right, honestly, it was like this voice of reason. It was things that I had always thought as a Wall Street analyst should be available in the marketplace, but I never had anyone, really, I think, distill it down into like the parts, which are obviously, when you sum it up from a whole perspective, really kind of made a huge impact. Can you talk a little bit, just from what you're saying, and how do grocers kind of work together and work with different technology partners?
Yeah, it's that's also part of the puzzle. And I actually come from a different industry, and when we look at the advancements there on authentication, supply chain optimization, I'll be honest, I was a bit blindsided walking into some of the food stats, specifically around food waste and perishable goods. But that is part of it. So part of it is just understanding and capturing the size of the problem, which is where we started. The next is being able to automate and get larger data sets so we can do some amazing things with the technology that already exists, like predictive analytics and machine learning. And then the last piece is making sure that there's both a pull from the consumer and an understanding of that, but then also interoperability. So whether that is, interoperability around the data speaking the same language, using standards-based organizations to make sure that, the way we see a product in one space is the same way it's seen in another space, we can truly optimize it completely. But I think at the end of the day, it's all going to be around collaboration with the consumer in mind. So for a long time, we would go into the grocery store and what was there was there. We kind of made our decisions and, all pushed around the cart and checked out. That retail model of kind of this push from the grocer has dramatically changed in the last year. So there is going to be a lot of pull. There is going to be more competition, not just around kind of how you optimize your internal efficiency, but also around how you show that to consumers. When grocers, even across competition boundaries, are able to find commonality in things like food safety and transparency, it starts to move the entire industry to unlock that level of margin and then go out and win their fair share of their space based on the customers they serve.
It's really interesting. Very inspirational, and thank you so much. But as consumers are trying to understand the amount of salt in their food, the amount of sugar in their food, the calories, there's almost this kind of other measure, right, that they would be looking for in terms of, a sustainability measure. Because I do think that, right, as long as there's price parity, right, they do want to, feel like they are giving back.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, I'm going to put that on Avery's shoulders, because that is a huge opportunity, and you can really start to change consumer behavior and then ultimately, have a significant impact on the planet. So thank you, Julie. We just scratched the surface here. So we're live in Las Vegas, and stay tuned as we will kind of debunk more of these myths. Thank you, Julie.
Can't wait to see the full report.
All right, take care. Thank you.